Throughout history, the formation and preservation of religious texts has been shaped by complex social, theological, and political forces. Among the many ancient writings that have survived from the era of early Judaism and Christianity, texts such as the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the books of the Maccabees stand as fascinating examples of literature that, while highly influential in certain communities, were ultimately excluded from the canonical Jewish and most Christian Bibles. The reasons for their exclusion are multifaceted, involving intricate debates over doctrine, tradition, authority, and the ever-evolving understanding of what constitutes sacred scripture. To fully appreciate the story of these books, we must journey back to a time when the boundaries of religious orthodoxy were not yet fixed, and when communities across the ancient Near East grappled with questions of identity, spirituality, and the meaning of divine revelation. These texts, far from being simple narratives, are rich tapestries of myth, law, eschatology, and historical reflection. They offer glimpses into the beliefs and anxieties of their authors and audiences, concerns that ranged from the origins of evil to the nature of the cosmos, to the struggles of preserving a distinct peoplehood in the face of foreign rule and cultural assimilation. Let us begin with the Book of Enoch, one of the most enigmatic and influential writings from the Second Temple period. Attributed to the mysterious figure of Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, this collection of texts weaves together visions of fallen angels, cosmic secrets, and apocalyptic judgment. The Book of Enoch was revered by many Jewish groups in the centuries leading up to the Common Era, and was highly influential among the early Christians. In fact, the Epistle of Jude in the New Testament quotes directly from Enoch, attesting to its significance. The central narrative of Enoch revolves around the Watchers, angels who descend to earth, take human wives, and teach humanity forbidden knowledge. This act leads to the birth of the Nephilim, mighty giants whose violence and corruption provoke God's wrath. The text delves into themes of transgression, cosmic order, and the ultimate fate of souls. It offers elaborate descriptions of heavenly realms, angelic hierarchies, and the mechanisms of divine judgment. For ancient readers, Enoch provided a framework for understanding the presence of evil in the world, the origins of sin, and the hope for future redemption. Yet, despite its popularity among certain sects and its clear influence on both Jewish and Christian thought, Enoch was excluded from the canonical Hebrew Bible and later from most Christian Old Testaments, with the notable exception of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which still regards it as scripture. The reasons for this exclusion are complex. Some scholars suggest that Enoch's vivid depictions of angels and its speculative cosmology may have clashed with emerging rabbinic sensibilities, which favored more restrained theological speculation. Others point to its association with apocalyptic movements that were viewed with suspicion by religious authorities. In the Christian context, as the boundaries of orthodoxy solidified, Enoch's esoteric teachings were increasingly marginalized in favor of texts that more directly supported developing doctrines. Turning to the Book of Jubilees, we encounter another remarkable example of ancient Jewish literature that sought to reinterpret and expand upon the stories of Genesis and Exodus. Known as the Lesser Genesis, Jubilees retells the biblical narrative with a particular focus on chronology, dividing history into a series of Jubilees, periods of 49 years each. The text emphasizes the importance of observing festivals, purity laws, and strict adherence to the commandments. It provides additional details about the patriarchs, angels, and the origins of various customs. Jubilees reflects the concerns of a community deeply invested in questions of identity and religious fidelity. It insists on the separation of Israel from the nations, the avoidance of intermarriage, and the maintenance of ritual purity. The text also introduces new elements, such as the idea that the law was revealed to the patriarchs long before Sinai, thus reinforcing the eternal validity of the covenant. Like Enoch, Jubilees was highly regarded among certain Jewish groups, particularly the sectarians at Qumran, who preserved multiple copies among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Despite its influence, Jubilees was not accepted into the Jewish or most Christian canons. Its strict legalism, sectarian outlook, and reinterpretation of Scripture may have contributed to its marginalization. For later Rabbinic Judaism, the authoritative interpretation of Torah was to be found in the oral law and the writings of the sages, rather than in new or expanded scriptural narratives. In the Christian context, as the Church distanced itself from Jewish law and ritual, a text so deeply invested in these themes found little place in the emerging canon. The books of the Maccabees, meanwhile, occupy a unique position in the history of biblical literature. These texts recount the dramatic events of the Maccabean revolt against Seleucid oppression in the 2nd century BCE, a pivotal moment in Jewish history. The 1st and 2nd books of Maccabees provide detailed accounts of the struggle for religious freedom, the rededication of the temple, and the establishment of the Hasmonean dynasty. They celebrate the courage of the martyrs, the faithfulness of the people, and the providence of God in delivering His chosen nation. For Jewish communities living under foreign rule, the story of the Maccabees offered inspiration and hope. It provided a model of resistance, piety, and the triumph of faith over tyranny. In Christian tradition, the Maccabean martyrs were venerated as examples of steadfastness in the face of persecution. Yet, the books of the Maccabees were not included in the Jewish canon, which was largely solidified by the end of the 1st century CE. They were, however, adopted into the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, and thus found a place in the Old Testament canons of the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, though not in most Protestant Bibles. The reasons for the exclusion of these texts from certain canons are diverse. In some cases, language played a role. The Jewish canon ultimately favored texts preserved in Hebrew or Aramaic, while the Maccabean books were composed in Greek. In others, theological concerns or the desire to limit the number of scriptural books may have influenced the decision. It is also possible that the political implications of the Maccabean story, with its emphasis on military resistance and nationalist aspirations, were seen as problematic in certain contexts. It is important to address the notion that these books were banned for revealing forbidden racial and spiritual truths. While it is true that the process of canon formation was shaped by debates over theology, doctrine, and authority, the exclusion of texts like Enoch, Jubilees, and Maccabees cannot be reduced to a simple conspiracy to hide hidden truths from the public. Rather, their marginalization reflects the complex dynamics of religious communities as they sought to define their identities, preserve their traditions, and respond to the challenges of their times. For example, the Book of Enoch's account of the Watchers and the Nephilim does indeed contain mythological elements that were later deemed problematic or heretical by some authorities. The fascination with angelology, esoteric wisdom, and apocalyptic visions was widespread in Second Temple Judaism, but over time, Rabbinic Judaism prioritized a more rational and legalistic approach to Scripture. Similarly, Christian leaders sought to establish a canon that would unify doctrine and practice, excluding texts that promoted alternative cosmologies or teachings. Jubilees' focus on ethnic separation and ritual purity reflects the concerns of a particular community grappling with issues of assimilation and identity under foreign rule. Its insistence on the eternal validity of the law was at odds with the direction taken by both Rabbinic Judaism and the nascent Christian movement, each of which developed distinctive approaches to the relationship between Israel and the nations. The Maccabean books, while celebrated in some circles, were ultimately left out of the Jewish canon, perhaps in part because their nationalist message became less relevant in the aftermath of the failed revolts against Rome. The emphasis shifted from military resistance to spiritual endurance and adaptation, and the canon that emerged reflected these new priorities. It is also important to recognize that, far from being suppressed or forgotten, these texts continued to be read, copied, and discussed for centuries. They were preserved among the Dead Sea Scrolls, translated into multiple languages, and cited by early Christian writers. In the case of Enoch and Jubilees, their influence is evident in the development of Christian theology, particularly in areas such as angelology, demonology, and the concept of the afterlife. Today, scholars and readers alike are rediscovering the richness and diversity of these ancient writings. They offer valuable insights into the beliefs, hopes, and struggles of the communities that produced them. They challenge us to reconsider the boundaries of the canon, and the processes by which sacred texts are chosen, preserved, and transmitted. The story of Enoch, Jubilees, and the Maccabees is not simply one of exclusion or censorship, but of the dynamic and contested nature of religious tradition. It reminds us that the boundaries of sacred scripture are not fixed, but are continually shaped by the needs, concerns, and aspirations of living communities. In reading these texts, we encounter voices from the past that speak to enduring questions of justice, identity, and the search for meaning. Let us now explore, in greater depth, some of the key themes and legacies of these remarkable books, and consider what they reveal about the spiritual and cultural world of ancient Judaism and early Christianity. The Book of Enoch's exploration of cosmic order and the origins of evil reflects a world in which the boundaries between heaven and earth were porous, and in which divine beings played an active role in human affairs. The story of the Watchers served as a powerful myth for explaining the presence of evil and suffering, and for articulating the hope that, one day, cosmic justice would be restored. The vivid imagery of Enoch's journeys through the heavens and his encounters with angelic beings captivated the imagination of ancient audiences, and its echoes can be found in later apocalyptic literature, including the Book of Revelation. Jubilees, with its meticulous chronology and legal rigor, represents a different approach to the challenges of maintaining religious identity in a pluralistic world. By asserting that the law was revealed to the patriarchs and that Israel was set apart from the nations from the very beginning, Jubilees offered a theological rationale for maintaining boundaries and resisting assimilation. Its emphasis on ritual purity, observance of festivals, and the rejection of foreign customs speaks to the anxieties of a community determined to preserve its distinctiveness. The Maccabean books, meanwhile, provide a window into the lived experience of Jews under Hellenistic rule. They celebrate the heroism of those who resisted forced assimilation and fought to reclaim their religious traditions. The story of the rededication of the temple, a festival still commemorated today as Hanukkah, became a symbol of hope and renewal. The accounts of martyrdom and resistance inspired later generations to stand firm in the face of persecution. The transmission and reception of these texts also reveal the diversity and pluralism of ancient Judaism. Far from being a monolithic tradition, Judaism in the Second Temple period was characterized by a vibrant array of sects, schools, and movements, each with its own distinctive scriptures, rituals, and beliefs. The canonization of Scripture was a gradual and contested process, shaped by the ebb and flow of historical events, theological controversies, and communal needs. In the Christian tradition, the boundaries of the Old Testament canon were also the subject of debate. The early Church, drawing on the Septuagint, included a wider range of texts than the later Jewish canon. Over time, as theological priorities shifted and new controversies emerged, the boundaries of the canon were refined and clarified. The decision to exclude or include certain books was often a reflection of broader debates about doctrine, authority, and the nature of revelation. The legacy of these writings endures not only in the texts themselves, but in the questions they raise about the nature of Scripture, the construction of religious identity, and the ways in which communities remember and reinterpret their past. By studying Enoch, Jubilees, and the Maccabees, we gain a deeper appreciation for the diversity and dynamism of the traditions from which they emerged. In conclusion, the story of these so-called banned books is not one of simple suppression, but of the ongoing negotiation of faith, identity, and authority. They remind us that the boundaries of the sacred are never fixed, but are always subject to debate, reinterpretation, and renewal. As we rediscover and engage with these ancient writings, we are invited to reflect on our own assumptions about tradition, revelation, and the search for truth. The Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the books of the Maccabees stand as enduring witnesses to the complexity and richness of ancient religious thought. They challenge us to look beyond the boundaries of the canon, to listen to the voices of the past, and to consider the ways in which texts shape and are shaped by the communities that cherish them. In doing so, we honor the legacy of those who sought to understand the mysteries of the cosmos, the demands of justice, and the meaning of faith in a changing world.